accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey Green Lantern fans, welcome back to another episode of the podcast of OA. This is episode number 199, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the just released Green Lantern issue number 6 and Green Lantern Annual number 1. We've had a little bit of a delay. We both, Phil and I, have been a little under the weather. Phil, my friend, I know you lost your voice a couple weeks ago when we were going to record. I'm assuming everything is all good and you're feeling good?
Hey, I can talk. That's a switch. But yeah, it was rough for a little while. Of course, I started back to work, and like you, I'm in the education system. So anybody out there, just know it's a pretty complex place to be in at this moment in time.
You're not kidding.
More complex than probably. I will say this: I'm 11 years into education, and 5 years in as administrator, and it's probably the most complex opening that I've ever had to endure, and it's still going.
I thought last year was going to be hectic with we were right in the middle of the COVID stuff, but I think this year, a year into it, it's actually worse because there's so many more things to plan for, but because we know more.
Well, and it's like a lot of places don't know what to do. They know what to do, but they don't know what to do. The protocols and the mandates are all over the map, that it's like, there's 3-foot distance for the kids in the classroom, and then they're packing 32 kids in a classroom. It's like, well, the physics, you cannot fit that many kids in a classroom with 3-foot distancing. It's just little stuff like that. And it's like, it's contradictory, but whatever, we're going to roll through it and see what happens. At the end of the day, I'd venture to guess that education had to start. It couldn't take another year off. And I think that what's going to have to happen is we're just going to have to push through the COVID thing. And along the way, the people are going to get sick. And I think that's just, I hate to say it, that's just going to be par for the course,
Yeah, I know what you mean. In New York, most of the schools here start the day after Labor Day or the 2 days after Labor Day. And in New York, the Department of Education, Department of Health didn't release the guidelines to schools until a couple of days before the Labor Day weekend. So it made it hard for everybody to kind of stop, drop, and roll and respond to what their opening plans were going to be based on that. And we're supposed to be testing people who either are not vaccinated or won't show or don't show proof of vaccination on a weekly basis. And that hasn't even been set up yet. There's no facilities to be able to do that. So it's one of those things where, we're trying to respond as best as we can, but boy, it's difficult because you sometimes can't make plans. It's like to kind of quote the late Roddy Piper, just when you think you know the answers, they change the questions.
That's a good quote, and you're right. That's how it is. I don't know. I don't wish being a superintendent or anything like that in times like this, but I don't know. I'm kind of glad we're back, but it's set me on a path to rethink my career choice moving forward. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm in my last 5 years, so it's too late for me to change.
You have to ride it out, man.
That's right. I'm at the top of the roller coaster just as you go to the lift hill. There's no getting off the coaster now. The ride's gone.
I hear you.
But you, my friend, and I have some comic books to talk about. Before we dive into that stuff, there's a little bit of Green Lantern news, not a whole lot. For those that are interested in DC Fandome, last year there was DC Fandome, and we kind of all were hoping there was going to be some Green Lantern stuff, and we sat through that whole event, and I'm using that word very lightly, and there was the only Green Lantern thing was how to make a Green Lantern ring in origami. There was more Jake from State Farm than there was Green Lantern, even though last year was Green Lantern's 80th anniversary. This year it's set for October 16th, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we haven't seen anything in the official listings, but there was a panel leak that was posted somewhere of the supposed panels, and again, take this with a ginormous Mogo-sized grain of salt, but apparently there may be a Green Lantern HBO Max panel in which the rest of the cast will be announced. I don't see that happening because you would think they would include that in the official stuff, but I guess we'll see as we get closer to the event. I'd like to think we're going to get some more information. I would like to see, are we going to get some more Green Lantern comics, but I don't think they're going to talk about anything comic book related that doesn't have a bat on it or Wonder Woman in it.
I agree, and that's kind of where my stance is. I don't think it's going to be any. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Nope,
not at all. And other really interesting news: the Green Lantern 2011 movie shifted to Netflix. It went off of HBO Max and it's on Netflix. I'm not sure for how long, but the really interesting thing was it actually hit the top 5 movies in the country. For a while.
I remember people tagging about it on Twitter and stuff, and I kept thinking to myself, how? Why?
Right. The only thing I can think of is, Ryan Reynolds has a new movie out. What is it called? The Good Guy or something like that? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But he has a new movie out, and so I don't know whether that's making it being interesting, people interested in it, or is it just the curiosity of, Ryan Reynolds has talked about this for 10 years now, literally, and people want to check it out and they haven't had an opportunity before. I don't know. It's interesting. You wonder if Warner Brothers is paying attention to that though and thinking, maybe we better get this Green Lantern Corps movie moving forward a little bit.
Who knows? I mean, I've given up trying to figure out exactly what Warner Brothers plans are moving forward. And sadly enough, it's like I keep watching all the Marvel stuff, and I don't want to get too involved in the conversation about it, but the thing that impresses me about all the Marvel stuff, and I'm talking about Loki, I'm talking about all the offshoots. I haven't seen Black Widow yet, and all these different movies are all different threads and different parts of a collective whole. And you see it. So the whole movie might revolve around a whole integral character, but at the same time they include little tidbits of stuff that happened in the Marvel universe, stuff that flashbacks to the original Iron Man with Tony Stark and stuff like that. And it's that's impressive to hold and maintain a narrative when you're telling stories, and they still keep that connective tissue there, and I just wish DC would do the same thing, and they're not at all.
I think DC really I shouldn't say DC, I think Warner Brothers really kind of messed things up. They had, everybody keeps saying the DC movies need a Kevin Feige, and I think Jeff Johns was that person, but he wasn't given the ability to have for the control that Kevin Feige has. And you still had the whole studio mentality, even up through the Justice League, where the studio was trying to dictate things rather than let DC Entertainment run with the ball. And I think that's kind of what sabotages it. And now you don't have that voice. I mean, I think you look at Stargirl, and it's such a great show. And who's the main guy behind it? Jeff Johns. For the whole Ray Fisher controversy and all that stuff. Jeff was the guy. He really was. I don't think anybody else had the depth of knowledge and the sincere love of the DC universe and the Hollywood connections and the experience in show business to be able to do that. And I think that opportunity is gone. I'm not sure we're going to get that kind of a singular voice. I myself, I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel movies, but I respect what they've been able to accomplish, certainly.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know what's to come. I'm hoping some way we're going to get there, but I think at this point, some people are tired of the whole connected universe bit where, I've got to go watch this movie, not because I'm really interested in the movie, but I don't want to miss out on what little tidbits are going to connect it to the larger fabric. I know a number of people who were interested in a couple of the Marvel films, and they felt obligated to go, not because they wanted to see the movie, but because they just didn't want to miss anything.
I mean, it is a plug, and it does attract attention, and I get what you mean. That you don't want to invest a lot of interest in things that maybe you may not like, and it does become tedious because then you feel like you're missing out on different points of and different information. To put it in perspective, like the movie The Eternals that's coming out, when you watch a trailer, they're talking about a lot of flashbacks to Thanos, the Snap or Endgame and stuff like that. Just the small stuff is cool because it still references points in its universe, and I think that maintains credibility because it does feel like it's all part of a universal whole. As far as having, individual movies like your Aquaman and stuff like that, and your Wonder Woman and everything, those can be fine and standalone on themselves. I always feel like there should be a pull back to something that's taken place to where if you ever did want to bring it back together, you'd have reasoning for it instead of just throwing crap on a wall and hoping that the artwork sticks. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how Green Lantern is in the top 5 and where it's going to go.
I think it's funny. But hey, more power to it, man. At least it's gaining some more fandom.
It's interesting how you see some comments from people on social media kind of looking back at the movie fondly and thinking, geez, this wasn't so bad. What was everybody complaining about? So it's funny. It's funny.
It is.
So if you were listening to the opening, this is episode number 199, and the next episode is episode number 200, and we're going to be having our old friend Bill Giancoli, the original co-host of the show, is going to be on and joining us as we kind of look back over the last 10 years and last 200 episodes. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that some folks want to send us some information to be included in the show. So, send an email to podcast@blogavoa.com or shoot me a message on Twitter or, let me know something through Facebook Messenger or whatever. Or even better yet, the best way is to call our voicemail line and you can leave up to a 1-minute message. And the phone number for that is 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362, and you can leave up to, like I said, a minute-long message. We'd love to hear from you folks out there and kind of include you in our celebration of the last 200 episodes. We're going to have that probably later this month, in a couple of weeks, I think.
It's going to be a good time. I can't wait to talk to Bill. I can honestly say I don't remember the last time I've actually talked to him, other than when I was maybe a guest on the show.
Yeah, Bill used to work at the same place I did, and he left and is working at one of our component school districts. And so I don't see him a whole lot and don't get a chance to talk to him as much, but sometimes we run across each other in meetings, or he'll stop by our campus to drop something off and we'll chit-chat for a few minutes. So I'm looking forward to looking back and thinking what he thinks about looking back on it. He was the one who really came up with the idea for the podcast and pushed me to do it. So in a lot of ways, this is really his baby. And, a lot of the things that he did, from the format of the show to some of the sound clips we still use as bumpers, was all of Bill's creativity. So I'm interested to hear what he thinks about what's gone on while he was in the show and what's transpired since.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. It's gonna be a fun roundtable.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So we've got a couple comic books to talk about. We've got the new issue of the current Green Lantern run, issue number 6, and we've got Green Lantern Annual number 1, where we find out how Jessica Cruz got the Sinestro Corps ring. Well, we kind of know how she did already, but kind of what happens once she gets the ring. And before we get to that point, we've got a Know Your Corps segment, my friend.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll come back in just a moment, and we'll start talking some Green Lantern comics.
All right, sounds great.
Yeah, in blackest day or brightest night, watermelon, cantaloupe, yada yada, a superstitious and cowardly lot, with liberty and justice for all.
Then again, maybe I should lead us. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware our power, Green Lantern's light.
Yay, team!
All right, fellow Owens, welcome back to another Know Your Corps segment. This week we have the dearly recently departed, Ash-Pak-Glif. Ash-Pak-Glif first appearance was Green Lantern 80 Page Giant number 3 from August 2000. The character was created by Scott Beatty and Graham Nolan. He hails from Space Sector 0312, the home planet of Peresin. Ash-Pak-Glif was a stony, vaguely humanoid Green Lantern from the shattered world of Peresin. He was recruited into the Green Lantern Corps by Bashi as part of preparations for a Green Lantern Corps invasion of Apocalypse. He participated in this invasion, and though it failed, he secretly provided the hostage, Raker Korrigat, with a power ring and corresponding battery, allowing Korrigat to fight a continuing guerrilla war against Darkseid's rule. Sadly, Ash-Pak-Glif will be missed. And there you have it, fans. Another great addition to the Know Your Corps segment.
All right, Brother Phil, that was a great segment on our dearly departed member of the Corps, Ash-Pak-Glif. He died in this current run in issue number 4. He was one of the Green Lanterns that was unceremoniously killed off panel by the slavers. He was one of the ones that got their bounty collected. So, speaking of that series, we've got the 6th issue. And believe it or not, according to what writer Jeffrey Thorne has been saying, this marks the halfway point of the first arc. I was not passing judgment.
What?
I know. But I was trying not to pass judgment, but this is the halfway point. So if you've enjoyed it thus far, you've got 6 more issues just like this till the end of the story. So we start out, this issue kind of overlaps narratively what we saw in the last issue, because this takes place just after Kelly Quintella has arrived on New Korrigar, and we're seeing Joe Mullane show up with Simon Baz as she takes Simon Baz down to rescue Kelly, and she goes and talks to Sinestro to kind of keep him distracted and maybe do a little bit of interrogation while she's at it. And as the issue starts out, they're in space, and Joe Mullane is kind of studying up on Sinestro, giving herself a crash course, and we see a flashback to the days when the 4 Corpsmen, Guy and Kyle and Hal and John were fighting Sinestro. So you see a little bit of a flashback. The coloring, we got white boots galore in that panel, unfortunately. But that's what transpires. And then she meets up with Sinestro, and they have a little bit of a intellectual duels of sorts, I guess you would describe it. Would that line up with what you think it was, Phil?
I mean, that's what it feels like. I mean, it's kind of like a duel of smarts, I mean, but it often seems like Joe Mullane kind of goes her own way a lot anyway. I don't know, she seems like she goes to the toot of her own horn. She doesn't apply to any rules or anything like that.
Well, I guess, I did read Far Sector. I'm assuming because that's the way she had to operate. That's just the way she's used to it, because she has no guardians to answer to right now. She's kind of in charge, and she's making the rules, whatever rules there are. But we see her sending Simon down to New Korrigar and leaving, and not knowing how much power she's got. I mean, she's got, I think 57% of her ring left. Mm-hmm. So she doesn't know how long it's going to last, depending on what happens. But she goes and drops Simon Baz off. And,
you mean the Broken Lantern?
Well, yeah, the Broken Lantern. Yeah, the Broken one. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Good dig there. Drops him off. And she's got 57%. I might have said something wrong there, but 57%. And it kind of jumps into the moment at which Kelly has attacked Sinestro's honor guard, and they have fallen, and we don't know where they've gone, but she lands on the planet, and she's made that giant John Stewart construct. And that's where the plot, or the narrative of this issue, intersects with the previous one. And we see how the 5 of them go after Joe Mullane instead of going back after Kelly, and she traps them in a bit of a maze. and then goes off to talk to Sinestro.
What do you think of Kelly? I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about her to really pass any judgment on her. I sent you a picture the other day of some comic book that's coming out from Image, and I swear to God, the character looks exactly like Kelly Quintella.
Yeah.
And so, as far as she goes, so she's a loose cannon. She's got a power source that's unheard of, according to this book. She's not in control of it, or she is. I mean, that's to be determined, you know. And her emotional strain's off the charts. She's not so. I mean, she's about the same kind of loose cannon that Hal Jordan is, but she's doing it in a not controlled environment. And I think and it feels like what these people are trying to do here, which is really kind of odd, as they're trying to rein her in. They're trying to control her because they're fearful of her weaponization. If I get that from the context.
Yeah, it's odd because, you know, in this issue, when you have Jo Mullein talking to the Thanagarian captain, she's talking about Kelly, and the Thanagarian refers to Kelly as a rogue lantern, and Jo Mullein says, well, you know, she's just a messed up little girl, and it's not an Owen weapon, and that the Guardians couldn't say boo to her about it, which I call BS on that one. The Guardians certainly could, because it's certainly based off of the same technology as the Power Rings. And if they're the Guardians of the Universe and they have the ability to kind of make peace, and you've got somebody walking around with a WMD, weapon of mass destruction arm, and they're a kid, you certainly can say more than boo about it all you want. That was one of my big bones of contention with this series, is the Guardians, no way would they let her keep this, and neither would John. You know, I find it so completely out of character and irresponsible of Jon Stewart as a character to say, yeah, you know, we're gonna kind of control her. She's a preteen kid. She's not even a teenager yet. And if she's not a Rogue Lantern, then why were you letting her walk around with a Green Lantern modified symbol on her uniform and making her wear a mask and look like a Green Lantern just an issue ago?
So did they give? Now I never read her until this, obviously. Did they give some? Has she had an origin story of where she got this power source at? So
I haven't read it myself, but the synopsis that is, as I understand it, and if I'm wrong, hopefully somebody will contact us and correct me. But the way I understand it is that she's on the streets of Bolivia, and there's a Green Lantern there who is wearing that gauntlet, and he's participating in a drug deal. So, awesome. I mean, right. I mean, it makes all kinds of sense, right? As I lift my feet up in the air. And he dies. He gets killed. He gets gunned down because the gauntlet isn't the ring. Now, why he's using that gauntlet and not his ring? Is it just to avoid detection that he's there? I don't know. But he essentially dies, and she gets his gauntlet.
So we don't know the name of this quote-unquote Green Lantern that was doing the drug deal then, I assume, right?
He was a no-name character as far as I know. And we don't know the origin of the gauntlet, even though it looks an awful lot like Krona's gauntlet.
Well, it does. It looks like the one that Hal had in Renegade.
Right, but it's apparently not the same gauntlet.
So, okay, so I'm going to take that. I'm going to run with it. So that leads me to believe that the whole entire time we've been reading Green Lantern, you and I, for these many years, this is a new type of gauntlet that's never been seen before until now.
Correct.
So if you're going to maintain that kind of writing narrative, that would mean that you defeat the purpose of what the Guardians represent the whole entire time frame up until now, because the Guardians would have known about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at least with Krona's gauntlet, you had some history behind it. You understand it was a test of the power battery or the power ring, and it was kind of the first dry run of it, and they kept it sealed up for the very same reason.
And,
you know.
And I remember that Renegade had a lot of backstory towards the gauntlet. You know, where it came from, you know, how it was developed, whatever the case may be. I remember all that stuff. So that's why I'm a bit confused by this Kelly character. Now, creating a character out of a vacuum is one thing, But if you're going to create a character out of a vacuum that has a mythos of other characters behind it, that has a lot of holes in it. So aren't you doing a disservice to that particular character by not providing that depth instead of giving them a shallow resonance when they first appear in a comic book?
Yeah,
I'm speculating here.
Yeah, it's kind of backwards storytelling from what we're used to, and I guess if we're going to get to the point where we find out what this gauntlet is, we should have gotten there by now. I think that's one of the problems and one of the criticisms of the series is it moves at such a slow pace that it borders on being boring. And those aren't my words; those are words I've read other people comment about the series. Is that it's just boring. It's not interesting enough.
No, it really is. And like when I was saying off mic, the Joe Maline Sinestro part of the story was probably the strongest, but only because Sinestro carries that. And fans know that because Sinestro can carry a book. I mean, Sinestro can carry a panel. I mean, he can carry a scene. I mean, the guy has a presence whenever he's written. And Joe Maline, I'm not going to give her any disservice. I'm not going to shade her or anything like that. But she played well off of the Sinestro take on this because she's new on the scene to him. And he's not familiar with her just as much as, well, she's actually familiar with him because everybody's heard of Sinestro. When we get to the second part is the part where it's like, why? What point is this second part for?
Right.
I would have rather maintained the signature hold on Joe Maline and Sinestro and hashed out some of the Kelly Quintella stuff while she's there than go into the second part of John Stewart that has no contextual value whatsoever to the story frame.
Right. It's interesting because a character like Sinestro, he's all about he's trying to learn as much about Joel Mulaney as he can through this interaction, and you kind of wonder who gets the better of the other. And to me, I don't see either one of them getting any more information other than Sinestro fesses up and says, "I didn't do this. If I would have, you'd know because I'd make sure everybody know I did it." Which I think is true to his character. Sure. I think that kind of points the direction, the interest of as to where this comes from in a completely different direction. But I didn't find, because there's no weight to the relationship, I didn't find it as intriguing as it would be as if it was one of the characters we're more familiar with that has a history with Sinestro.
No, that's true. And he was referring to her as Last Lantern the whole time.
Yeah. So he doesn't know that Hal's still out there and so on and so forth. But that part gets over with and they retrieve things and that kind of ends that part of the story. So there wasn't a whole lot here other than we find out in this half of the issue that Sinestro didn't do it, or at least he's saying he didn't do it. And that's really all we discover. And then, as you said, we shift to the John Stewart part of it, and this is all exposition and telling us kind of what happened to Kilowog and Hanu, but in a way that could have been done in a page. We get a little bit of extra information. We finally find out who the mysterious character is that showed up in issue 4 and issue 1.
Oh, the dude at the end.
Yep, Lonar. Which Lonar is one of the new gods, but he's one of the lesser known new gods, and actually. He and John Stewart have met before back in the 4-part Cosmic Odyssey story. That was the story in which John infamously blew up Xanshi.
Nice.
Lonar was the new god that kind of went to Earth to grab the Justice League to have them go get involved in that whole conflict. And you can kind of see this is leading towards some new god stuff. Obviously the Golden Centurions are tied to the fact that they are using new god technology. And I did like when they get to this part. I mean, I normally don't care for Tom Rainey's art, but I did like the fact that there's Kirby Crackle, which really visually draws that connection back to it being Kirby-esque stuff and tying back into the new gods. I really did like that part.
Yeah. I kind of, it's funny you mentioned that because I didn't pick up on that before, but I didn't put the connection of Kirby and the New Gods together until you mentioned that. So you're right. That is kind of neat.
So it looks like we're getting some New Gods, Fourth World stuff thrown in here, which is interesting. I think the other thing this issue does is it confirms for us that time is passing differently in the dark sectors where John and Salak and Nort and all the other Lanterns that survived so far this quest mission. Time is passing differently there than it is passing in our space.
Yeah, that's clear. But like I said, the second half of this book, it's just kind of like blah. I mean, in Kilowog, look at Kilowog.
The artwork, I have a real hard time with Rainey's artwork. It just doesn't appeal to my sensibilities. I'm not saying it's bad because art is subjective, but for me, it doesn't resonate. And I've said that before, and it continues, especially when it comes to some of the faces. I think some of his alien work, his work with the aliens is great, but his work with humanoids, not so much. I didn't recognize the Gold Centurions at all, so that one is a mystery to me still. And I don't know who, they're servants of the Lightbringer, so who is the Lightbringer? I don't know.
One of the Lightbringer is Highfather.
It could be. I would find that the actions of the Gold Centurions and what they did, because you kind of see some of the history of the different people, the Sergilon's history, and you see what happened, doesn't line up to me so much with Highfather, but I'm not sure who else it could be.
I don't know who else. They're talking about the Barrier War.
Yeah. So it's definitely a fourth world connection somewhere. I'm not as up on my Kirby as I'd like to be, so it could be a character that we've seen before. It's just not one that comes to mind as I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on any of that either. I can't remember the last time I read the Fourth World or any of the New God stuff. It's been quite a long time.
Yeah, I've got the absolute Jack Kirby Fourth World Volume 1, but I haven't cracked into it yet.
Because it's beefy.
It is. But again, we see Lonar at the end of this half, and then it says next Evolutionary Wars. But the back half of this issue, in a way, I feel like DC has done Jeff Thorne a disservice because he pitched a John Stewart story, and he's getting to kind of write it, but it wasn't his idea to destroy the power battery. That was DC's editorial mandated that for whatever reason, and so he's having to write this other stuff. But again, he accepted the job, but I think it would have been better if DC had just let him write a John Stewart miniseries and let him tell his story and do something different with the main core of the franchise. But
you're right. I mean, because at the end of the day, I'm not even that big of a John Stewart fan, but I'm also cognizant enough to know that if it's a Green Lantern and it's John Stewart and it's centered around him doing something, I'm okay with that as long as it's the full breadth of it. And of course, having other Lanterns in there too, but you can make it John Stewart centric, and I'd still be fine with that. But this one just seems fragmented, and I'll go back to what I said earlier. The stronger half of this was the Joel Moline Sinestro part. If that would have been the whole issue, I felt like this issue would have been a lot better than what it was.
Well, you and I talked about this last time we recorded. Was you're dropping $6 an issue. If this is halfway through the story, that means you're going to end up spending $72 to read this story. If this was collected in a collected edition, would you pay $72 for it?
Absolutely not. And if I did, I'd be upset with myself had I not read it before.
Right. It just doesn't have the engagement or it's just not interesting enough. And
you and I have those books on our shelves, and we have them there for good reason. Because if we want to go back and read it, we know we're going to enjoy it. And I hate to say this, but if I had this collected on my shelf, even if it's given to me as a present or whatever the case may be, I guarantee you it would either, number one, be sold later on down the line in life, or it would collect dust.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that because as a fan, that's where I stand with this particular run.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've often been considered a Green Lantern completionist. And I've been working on filling the holes in my Silver Age collection in the Volume 2 section, and I'm missing some books down during the Kyle era, but I know those are going to be easy enough to pick up. But I almost, do you buy this because you're a Green Lantern fan? I can't do that. I can't, because I'm telling DC that I think this is good, and I'll pick it up later secondary. I was at my comic shop, Heroes Your Mom threw out today, and I was picking up my other books I was buying, and I was talking to Jared, the store owner, and we were chit-chatting about things, and I asked him, how is the new Green Lantern book selling? And he was like, I'm not even buying 10 copies of it, and I'm still holding on to half of them.
God.
Now, it's a small shop. We live in a small area, so granted, it's a small shop. But I was picking up the new issue of Geiger, the last issue of Part 1, and he sells like 5 or 6 times the number of issues of Geiger from Image than he sells on a main Green Lantern book. And we were recounting back in the days when Blackest Night came out, where he couldn't buy enough copies. He was buying 50 or 60 copies and couldn't keep them on the shelf.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, small shop or not, I mean, even a large shop, if they purchase, let's say for whatever, 20 copies of this book, you can't tell me you're selling over 5 of those in a 1 week's time frame. No, I wouldn't buy that. I'm just saying, I don't see how that would be possible.
Right.
But then again, I'm not the purchaser, so I wouldn't know.
Right. I mean, shops are in the position of, okay, I know I have this many people who subscribe to the book and have it in their pull list, so I've got to buy that many copies. Now, how many do I buy for the people that aren't in my subscription service, and how many can I sell? Because otherwise I'm stuck with the leftovers. It isn't like I can send them back. They don't have a return policy on these. So, you guess. And he doesn't want to be, retailers don't want to be caught in the position of not having a book. So some of them, they overbuy. So when you look at the sales numbers, I think in July, the issue that came out in July sold 31,000 copies. That isn't they sold 31,000 copies to people who were reading it. That's how many the comic shops ordered. So how many really got bought? I don't know. It's kind of a sad state of affairs. But there are people that love the book. It's just, for me, I just, it doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't interest me. I wish we were getting something better.
Well, on that note, we can move on to something that was better.
That's right. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the Green Lantern Annual. Good save, Brother Phil.
You're welcome.
Listen up, all you white circles. This is Drill Instructor Kilowog, and you're listening to the podcast of Oa. And don't you forget it, boozers.
So, Phil, the Green Lantern Annual for 2021 is out. This was delayed. It was supposed to be out last week, I think it was, and it got pushed to being this week. And this one is interesting because it takes what we saw in the Green Lantern Future State book, the Jessica Cruz part of that story, and it inserts that into continuity, and this is what happens afterwards. So I thought that was cool. And then it also kept the same creative team. So you've got the same people that worked on that short story working on this one. So you've got Ryan Cady doing the writing, and art chairs are shared by a couple of people. Sammy Basri and Tom Derenick did that. Hi-Fi was the colorist, very familiar name. And the cover by Alex Sinclair and Bernard Chang, again, very familiar names to Green Lantern fans. But this one picks up kind of right after, not long after Jessica gets the power ring from that whole story in Future State, that little 2-parter they did where she was on a space station in a sector house, and the Sinestro Corps were there, and she takes them down, Alyssa Drack and Ugg and Lowe, and she then returns to New Corrigar, and Sinestro doesn't realize it's her. He thinks it's his crew, and it's not. It's Jessica Cruz, and she's there. And what was interesting about this tale was Jessica using the Sinestro Corps ring as a means to an end. She wants to get back home, but Sinestro, being Sinestro, I don't want to say he seduces her, but he shows her the other side of wearing a Sinestro Corps ring, and how embracing the power of fear can actually be useful. And I think it gives us, the readers, a whole different perspective.
Well, he really does it. He touches to her inner demons, and And I think that's what he's known for as a character. He can extrapolate that, and he can build upon that. And not only that, he reinforces it with a character like Jessica, because even the narrative between her and Hal in this book, even though they were at odds, and even though Hal really comes at her in a strong way, he does pull back because he also does realize that she has some kind of control with it, even though Sinestro's pulling the strings.
Right. You kind of wonder, I love the part in the beginning where he lets Lyssa Drak and Jessica go at it, because he's measuring Jessica to see, what can I do with her? How can I manipulate her? Because at the end of the day, Sinestro is a master of manipulation, and he's trying to figure out what's the strategy with this person, because he doesn't have any experience with her yet. And, is Jessica a victim here, or is she really... I think, her sincerity is that she's trying to figure out how to function. And she originally, I think, wanted the ring just to get home. But after she has the experience she has, realizes, well, maybe I can do some good with this. And I'm going to have to walk that fine line between being a stereotypical member of the Sinestro Corps and being true to herself.
And I got to say that, I've always loved and adored Lyssa Drak.
Yeah.
But even after reading this issue, she's even more of a prevalent character that I wish she'd get more screen time. She's just, her and Jessica were really kind of cool together. And I'd really like to see them two together at some point. I mean, granted, that's a pipe dream, but at the same time, they really worked well together. And I don't hate to say this, but I've always been a huge fan of Jessica Cruz, and I really, really like her wearing the yellow ring. I think it fits her character a little bit more than it does the Green Lantern one.
Yeah, I think knowing, after reading this issue, because at first I was very skeptical about her being a Sinestro Corps member, but after reading this issue, I'm kind of sold on it. And I think Jessica and Lyssa are the new Guy and Arkillo.
That's a good comparison.
I did really kind of like this. I was going into it kind of, like I said, being skeptical because I didn't think it was a good fit, but I was also the one that, and I still kind of hold to this, is that I thought that Jessica was a great character as Power Ring, more so than as a Green Lantern, because the Power Ring was really a manifestation of her anxiety, and it allowed people who don't suffer from anxiety to maybe get a better glimpse, because the ring was that kind of avatar for the anxiety. And this is a little bit different because of her inner monologue. And I think they do a really good job with her inner monologue and her characterization. I thought their Hal characterization was a little over the top. I think Hal might have been a little bit more open, knowing that Jessica has been through something and he trusts her because he trusts her as Power Ring. So I thought his reaction was a little strong, but it had to serve their story. It's one of those cases where you write a character perhaps a little over the top or a little out of character because it serves your story.
Right. Yeah. Right. I felt I feel like he came at her kind of strong.
Yeah. Too strong.
Yeah, a little too strong, but in a sense, though, it kind of makes sense why he would, only because. With everything going on, we'll call it what you will, the fall of the Corps or whatever, and him being on Earth while all this stuff is happening out there in the outer worlds or whatnot. But that's why I said earlier he pulls back, because while he does come on strong, I don't think he realizes he's in the wrong, but Jessica's allowed to explain herself and explain her situation. And I think that gives Hal a little bit of credibility that, okay, she's got this, and, I'm going to let this play out.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, Hal's not going to stop her. There's no way.
Well, I think the reason why I think it's an overreaction is because, he was Jessica's mentor, and Hal himself had to don a Sinestro Corps ring during the War of the Green Lanterns. He knows sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have thought he would have given her the benefit of the doubt, because, again, it's a very big brother, little sister relationship that I've gotten a vibe out of that from the two of them. So I kind of would have thought, but it serves a story. I think it was just a little, the whole, our people are dying all over the galaxy, but you stop and have yourself a job interview with Sinestro was a little overly harsh, not completely in character for Hal, but
he does mention that his and Joe Mullane's are the only rings that still work.
Right. And I guess, to me, it goes back to they knew where Joe Mullane knows, this is harking back to the main series, but they know Hal's on Earth. Simon Baz knows Hal's on Earth. Why in the world hasn't he told Joe Mullane this, and why hasn't Joe Mullane reached out to Hal? Why? I don't know. It's silly to me. You knew where some of these guys were going.
You would think Joe Mullane would have heard of him by now, surely.
Right. She sees him in the flashback in the issue we just talked about.
Right.
But
so go ahead.
You would think Simon Baz would be saying, well, hey, they sent Hal. He's the most experienced person. He was sent to Earth. He's probably still there. Why don't you take a quick jaunt over to Earth and find out what's going on, or contact the Justice League and they can get in touch with Hal and you can find out if he's still around and what's going on.
Right. I mean, Hal is one of the most prominent characters. I mean, you'd think she'd just reach out, on her ring. Hey, Hal, I got some questions for you here.
Right. It's one of the things about that run that's kind of nonsensical. But back to this issue, at least Hal knows that she's there. He hasn't gone off to Oa. To me, which is a little out of character for Hal, because I'm like, well, I'm just going to sit back and wait until Joe Mullane tells me. He doesn't know who Joe Mullane is. Like, he'd be like, the heck with that. I'm going to Oa to find out what the heck's going on. But anyway, the issue ends with Jessica being the Sinestro Corps Lantern of Sector 2814. She learns a lesson because she's a little naive in how she deals with the ship that they encounter, and she fixes her mistake. And there's some neat sequences. I loved seeing Hal with the bow and arrow. I thought that was kind of funny.
That was cool.
The little bow and arrow construct, and they resolve the thing at the end, and he again trusts Jessica despite his misgrumblings there, but whatever. And so it ends. But to me, the intriguing part of this was that at the end, when he goes back and she kind of puffs her chest out at Sinestro, which I thought was funny. I'll make you remember too if you're just another monster. Like, she's going to be able to do anything against Sinestro. But at the end it says, soon what nightmares may come. So is this perhaps a new book, or is this going to intersect back into the main title? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I liked seeing Lyssa show up again at the end, and of course she had the book with her.
Yeah.
Of course, right. I don't know if it's going to play out into a new book. If it does, I'll be excited. I'll say that. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of potential of what Jessica can do inside the Sinestro Corps. And I really would like to see a play out with her, Lyssa, and Saronic Natu at some point.
Yeah, Saronic Natu is the one that is the missing piece to this whole puzzle.
Yeah, I don't get it.
She was in charge of the Sinestro Corps, the last we knew, and she's nowhere to be found. And it's funny because I've heard people talk about they're interested in seeing a Sinestro Corps member be a hero, and that it's something new. And I was like, well, geez, Saronic Natu was doing that a while ago. That was her whole shtick, as she was trying to rein it in and make their mission a little bit different.
Yeah, I think her and Jessica would be good. They'd play well off one another too.
Yeah,
I mean, even having Sinestro there would be good. I mean, they're not going to come out with a Sinestro Corps book. I mean, we can always. I don't see how that would be possible, and I can't see. Reading Jessica for as long as I have, I can't see them making a shift like this and making it stay for a long period of time. Maybe a few issues. I feel like fans would be disappointed that she's not part of the Green Lantern Corps anymore. But I've always questioned the fact of her actually being a Green Lantern anyway, even when she was. Like, it's cool. I like her as a Green Lantern. But to be quite honest with you, a lot of her writing to me never felt like she fit that kind of iconic role. It felt like to me like she was either, like you had said, Power Ring, or something different than a Green Lantern, but still having that same mantra.
Right.
And this one felt more natural to me with her because, like I said, I feel like Sinestro really, really, really played off of her inner demons, and she might not recognize it because most of these characters are naive to begin with, especially when they're coming face to face with Sinestro for the first time. And she may very well be naive in this whole series too. But I really, really like where this is going, and I'd hate to see it come to an end. There's so much potential here. There's more potential here than I see in the other book.
Right. It's kind of a sad state of affairs when the annual is better than the ongoing series.
It's never happened before. I don't think I've ever read a book where the annual's been better than the regular line. I don't remember.
I don't see this spinning into a new series. I see this kind of circling back into the main series versus being its own thing. And yeah. I think it's a good thing for the character because I think Jessica got to the point that Kyle eventually got to, was that, okay, the whole shtick behind Kyle is the everyman gets a power ring, has to live up to his legacy. Well, that he's already been there, done that. What do you do with the character now? And they struggled with, how do I keep this character fresh? And I think with Jessica, they spent a lot of energy in the Green Lantern series talking about how she dealt with her anxiety and so on. But then she got to the point where she was just like every other Green Lantern. And so what sets her apart? So I think this is a creative way of making that character stay fresh. But like you, I don't see it lasting too long. But at the same time, I can't see them going into another Sinestro Corps type of an event again. So how does she break away, and how long does it last? Is it only until the Green Lantern Corps comes back and she ditches the ring? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I hope.
I hope.
All right, my friend. Well, my power ring has started to blink, and that's telling me we've got some listener feedback.
All right, cool. I'm ready to listen.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and let the power ring let us know what you guys out there are thinking.
This is Razor, and you are listening to the blog of Oa. You need to keep listening, otherwise I will track you down with all of my skill, and you will feel my wrath.
Our first message is from Rudy, who has feedback about the show in general. Transmitting audio in 3, 2, 1.
I found your podcast and Facebook group a little over 2 months ago and have binged from episode 1 to current. And what an amazing ride it has been. I've loved listening from the beginning to gain a handle on both your perspectives. The fact you can be unbiased and yet remain true to yourselves is a breath of fresh air. Hal and Sinestro have always been my guys, enough that I've had them tattooed on me. I've had great respect for the first 4 Earth Lanterns, giving the newer a chance, but haven't found that one thing that will get me to bond with them, but with a good writer that's just a matter of time. Please stay as you are bringing positivity and joy to the fandom with your knowledge and banter. From a South African Owen.
Hey, Rudy from South Africa. That's really, really, really cool. Man, thanks for your comments. I can tell you right now that I appreciate hearing that, and I know for a fact that Myron probably does a little bit more than I do, because there is a time when, and this is Myron's baby, right? This is Myron's child, the podcast of Oa. And there are times when I feel brother Myron getting down, thinking that he may not be doing the right thing by throwing criticism where it needs to be thrown, but he doesn't want to ride the bandwagon like everybody tends to do when it comes to new material and stuff. But I appreciate the fact that that fans that listen to our podcast get it, that we're not throwing shade because we feel like we just want to throw it at people or throw it at a book. We're throwing shade because it's a critical eye. And when you work the gambit of the comic book world, it's a subjective nature, and people need to learn to take criticisms on one point and appraisals on the other. You're not always going to get the high praises that you want, and that's just the way life works. And the ebb and flow of comics is exactly what takes place, and that has a lot to do with fandom. And for guys like you and for people like us, I've got a Green Lantern tattoo, and you got one. That's awesome. But I feel like, Rudy, you share a lot of the same opinions me and Myron do. What do you think?
Well, first of all, Rudy, thank you so much for joining the podcast of Oa Family. And boy, what willpower to get through all the episodes in 2 months. Right. That's pretty amazing. I'm very, very impressed. So thank you for investing in us and joining us for the ride. And, I'll co-sign a lot of things that Phil says. Is nobody wants Green Lantern to be a success as much as I do. When we went through the whole Jeff Johns era and we got to Blackest Night and Green Lantern was on everybody's lips and people were getting the rings and cosplaying like crazy and really getting into it, I could not have been happier. It was like finally everybody gets what I have gotten my whole life, and I was so excited by that. So I look at everything through a lens of wanting Green Lantern to be good, and it's very disheartening when it isn't. And some people, for example, didn't like the Grant Morrison run. I enjoyed it. Do I think it was great? I think it was above average compared to some of the things we've gotten in the past. But I can't sit by and just be the guy that is the cheerleader when I don't think it's good. And there are plenty of people out there who'll be cheerleaders. There are some people that it doesn't matter if it's got Green Lantern on it; they think it's great. And because they don't have a critical eye, or they're not looking at it through the same lens. Or if you look at the professional reviewers, they're not looking at it through the eye of a fan who's got any longevity with the mythology. They're just looking at it as just another book. And I'll be honest with you, some of the things that I've heard from people who write for some of these sites that DC gives the books to for free in advance, they're afraid to write too much of a negative review or to be too critical because they're afraid they'll lose their free books. So, you have to look at, when you're looking at people who review books, are they being honest as a fan, or are they just somebody who's looking at it as a piece of literature, of comic book literature, or is it marketing for them? And hey, I'm getting free stuff from DC and we don't want to risk it, so we got to give them a good review. Is it that? I don't know. Like I said, you can go elsewhere and find people who are falling all over this series, and you don't have to look very far. But most of what I see is disinterest more than anything else. But I couldn't be more excited to hear from somebody from South Africa. I don't think we've ever in the history of the show heard from anybody from South Africa. So that's really, really cool. And I appreciate you being along with us for the ride. And, he's got a tattoo. Phil, you got a tattoo. I don't have a Green Lantern tattoo. Something's telling me I got to get one.
Hey, when I come up, there's going to be a time in our life where we're going to make our way up and we're going to finally get to meet in person. Maybe when we do, me, my wife, you and your wife will go get you a tattoo.
We'll see. I now that I'm getting older, at least I'll know how my skin is drooping, so I'll know not to put it in certain locations that it'll look awful. But
fair point.
All right, Power Ring, go ahead and let us hear the next piece of feedback.
The next feedback comes from Alex, who is commenting on the current Green Lantern series. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Hey guys. I started listening to the podcast around the future state issues, and this is my first time writing in. I got into GL in college when I discovered the Jeff Johns run. I have read a number of back issues since then and have even gotten a tattoo of the GL symbol on my chest. I am writing in about the current GL run and some of the decisions being made in it. While I think I like a few more elements in this run than you guys, I do agree that there is a lack of a story. I feel like many of the same plot points are being retread every issue. I hope Thorne starts drawing things together and gives us more of the story as to why the central power battery has blown up. I also hope we get a good explanation as to why Jessica Cruz has become a Yellow Lantern and why she wouldn't try to desert the Sinestro Corp as soon as that ring found her. I'm writing in before the annual, so this might have been explained by now. I have to say, I appreciate your criticisms of the run and don't think you're being too unjust. Having opinions is what being human is all about. You guys don't attack anyone for liking the book, so no one should attack you for disliking it. Anyways, I can't wait for episode 200 and know you've made a lifelong listener out of me.
Hey, Alex, thanks for reaching out. I agree with a lot of your feedback. And Alex also has a tattoo. This is like a running thing. I feel like I'm suddenly no longer a part of the group because I don't have a tattoo. I'm going to have to do something. I got to have to do something about it, man.
Me, Alex, and Rudy are hanging out soon.
And I'm glad, Alex is finding things that he likes in this run. Just because we're critical of it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it if you do. I don't, but that's okay. And we did get, as he points out, he wrote this before the annual. We do get a good explanation as to why she became a Yellow Lantern, and it does make those future state issues relevant, because that is something that definitely has carried over. And when you go back and look at those future state stories, they won't all occurring at the same time, because as we've heard from Jeff Thorne, the whole John Stewart stories were 17 years in the future. Now, is that 17 years in dark space time or our time? I'm not sure. But obviously, whatever happened with that Jessica Cruz story where she gets the rings, that's how she gets the rings. And now we know why she became a Sinestro Corps Lantern. So I hope that's going to be interesting for people.
It's funny because Alex writes that he discovered the Jeff Johns run, and I think that's been one of that's always been our go-to, right? Because a lot of people will talk about, well, where should I jump on Green Lantern? And your default position is to go for the Jeff Johns run because he set the standard, right, moving forward. Now, when we talk about how Thorne is working on this particular Green Lantern book, and I'll be one to say that there's parts of it I do rather enjoy, some of it. As a whole, no, I don't, because I don't feel anything's connected and I don't feel like the stories are lining up. But I will say that comparative value, if you're gonna go the distance to draw a comparison between Thorne and Johns, you're gonna lose. Thorne's gonna lose dramatically, because you can't compare those two for two reasons. Number one, there are two different types of people that are doing that book, but the most important reason is the timing. Jeff Johns' book and his particular Green Lantern run came out at a time, and it really, really sparked an interest during that particular fragmented time frame. Thorne isn't as lucky to have that, because I feel like with the Green Lantern book and the Green Lantern Corps in general, I don't feel like DC knows what they want to do with them. So they give it to a writer to see if he can do whatever he wants to do with it, or whatever constraints he put on him as a writer, whatever they told him he needed to write about or didn't need to write about. First of all, that's a problem, because a lot of writers want to develop and want to write how they want to write and create stories how they see fit. I'm no different when I do some of my stuff. To have constraint on that isn't easy for a writer, because you're not allowed to develop and come out of that shell, because you're encapsulated in it because of the crackdown on what you can and can't write about. And maybe that's part of the reason why this book is dry. I don't know. And I, to be quite honest with you, I don't care to know. My issue is with DC giving it to a person and the person being 6 issues in and not showing me that he's worthy of carrying the title. If I had my perception 6 issues in, and I know how the popularity of this book is at this point, which I don't think it's very high, they're not going to they may get a year out of it, but I'm shifting, but I'm changing the platform after a year. Somebody else needs to take the reins. Again, that's not my decision to make. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be too critical of him and the book, but I will be critical of the content, because that's relevant as me being a Green Lantern fan, just like Myron is, and having opinions, like you said, is what a human is all about. And, you have your opinions, Myron has his, I have mine, as does a gajillion other people that troll on social media. So we're just here to navigate that and read the books in a way that we're reading the books, and we'll give the feedback how we see fit. And it may align with what some people think, and it may not. That doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It just means we're fans like you guys are. We got the ring going off again. Let's get to the next message.
Green Lantern Fan 2814 has some more feedback for you, with more commentary on the new Green Lantern series. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Thank you for responding to my comment in the last episode. I think you're too hard on yourselves for giving your honest opinion. There's so little GL content out there and so many who don't really care about the franchise's history and if DC ruins it. I agree that Thorne isn't fully to blame for the crap DC is doing to GL, but writing such an uncompelling story and insulting change to the mythos is all his doing. Personally, Kelly is the only character Thorne is writing well. Joe is boring and confusing. Why would you care about a bunch of dead lanterns you didn't know? John is generic, and Simon is just brainless. The battery destroys and thousands of lanterns dead, but you don't care to look into the whereabouts of your fellow lanterns like Jess, Kyle, and Hal? Or contact the Justice League on Earth or the hundreds of space heroes like Hawkman and Adam Strange. My biggest problem with the current run is that I saw a lot of it just happen during the New 52. I've only been reading GL monthly for 9 years now, and this is already the second time I'm seeing the GLs destroyed and the Yellow Lanterns taking over. It feels repetitive and like DC has no idea what they're doing with GL in any capacity. As much as I hated the Morrison run, like you said, at least they had a direction for the core. Thorne does not. With the first comment though, this is number 5 of the series and we've each spent $25 already on oversized issues. How can a series be this slow and boring?
Okay, well, I'm going to try not to laugh at this, Green Lantern fan 2814, because let me tell you something, there's a lot to unpack in this. So I'm going to start out with the one that I noticed the most. Simon is just brainless. I will say this. If I was going to give a defensive posture for Simon Baz, and this is the one and only time I'm going to do this, is the fact that Simon Baz has been written before and had more caliber of interest than the bubble this poor guy is put in at this point. I mean, it almost feels like they don't know what to do with him, so they shoehorn him in just to fit a mold. Let's put it this way. You could take any character in any comic book that's out there right now and put him in Simon Baz's characterization in the Jeff Thorne run, and it wouldn't change the dynamic of the book, period, at all. None. Kelly being the only character Thorne is writing well, I can't comment on that too much because I don't know what Thorne's written before this because I'm not into some of his stuff, so this is new to me. He's new to me, and I'm not into Kelly before this because I don't know anything about the character. Joe Moline being boring and confusing, maybe a little bit. She was a little bit more prominent in Far Sector when I did read it, and I felt like it had a little bit more fun, and she was able to play a little bit more or be a better character in that book. But now I think she's a small fish in a big pond, and I think that's where her problem may lie. What do you think, Myron?
Well, I think he makes I'm assuming it's a he, I'm sorry. But I think Green Lantern fan 2814 makes a lot of points that are very similar to what you and I have been saying, especially when it comes to things like, Joe Mullane is there and you're not checking to find out whereabouts fellow Earth Lanterns are when you've got Simon Baz right there who knows where they were sent. So why aren't you really pushing for those, especially Hal, who we know is on Earth, and Earth hasn't been destroyed. And there's the Justice League on Earth. There are people you can talk to and speak with, and nobody's reached out to Earth. And I realize she's doing her investigation and doesn't want anybody to know that Hal might be there, but send Simon Baz on a mission. He could go find Hal, or in solitude, reach out to Earth. There's things you could be doing, but I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but there are a lot of problems with this. Man. This horse is a pulp, but I do got to say, Phil, I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said about Simon Baz.
It is, and it felt okay saying it in somewhat of his defense. I mean, if you're going to do a character, if you're going to, he's been around for a while, at least give him some credit. I mean, hell, he's put in a bubble. I mean, he literally is put in a bubble in that last issue. Right. Literally.
I do agree that I think Thorne is writing Kelly well, not in that I know the character, but I think that he's writing Kelly like a kid who's been through something very traumatic and has a weapon of mass destruction strapped to her arm. I'm not sure where he got his experience for writing that kind of thing, but I think the post-traumatic stress syndrome and her irrationality, I think, is very true to a kid. I do give him props for that. And I do like the idea of the Crux worlds, because I think that makes more sense than what Jeff Johns tried to do to explain why there were so many Earth Lanterns. So I'm okay with that, but the rest of it, eh.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've got another message to get to. So Power Ring, go ahead and let us know the next one.
Peter has some feedback for the show regarding Green Lantern issue 5. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I was really put off by the opening Sinestro Mac Daddy scene. Totally out of character and a lazy way to show that he's the boss. But everything from Teen Lantern to John Stewart isn't working for me, and I feel like I'm following solely out of completism at this point. Not really sure I even care who destroyed the battery at this stage, as long as it's not Hal Jordan. The wonderful thing about the Morrison run is that he told amazing GL stories within the GL framework. He didn't need to blow it up to make it work. Now, we need to slog through the battery mystery and then another GLC rebuild before we get to actual GL stories again, so it's really a lost year or two with no reward in sight.
Hey, Peter, thanks for reaching out. Appreciate the comments you had about the 5th issue of Green Lantern. And as Phil likes to say, Pimp Nestro was something that was a little off-putting. You know, it to me, it seemed a little out of character, but I guess, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't. Yeah, exactly. It felt a little sleazy to me. I mean, we know he had relations with Lyssa Drac, but I kind of felt like he's the kind of guy that might have a single relationship with someone to indulge in that part of his personality or his wants and desires and needs. But I don't see him, as you said, being the Mac Daddy that we saw there.
It doesn't strike me as a harem type of guy.
Yeah. And I appreciate your comments about the Morrison run. You know, I think you echo a lot of my tastes in terms of, you know, it may not have been the greatest run. You know, I mean, it's hard after you get through the golden age we had with Jeff Johns. It's hard for anything to compare to that, because if you look at the history of Green Lantern's publication history, back in the day, you know, when John Broome and Gil Kane were creating everything, it was under that different set of sensibilities. And it was never designed for I'm going to build an organic universe where all these things make sense. It was like, we're publishing funny books for kids, right? So you didn't have those kind of sensibilities. And then post the Hard Traveling Heroes era, when you got into the Bronze Age, you know, there was some of that kind of stuff with some ongoing narrative, but it wasn't the same thought out thing. Whereas I think Jeff Johns had the great fortune of being able to figure out, okay, how do I want to tell this story? And I've got time to think about it before it's going to be published, because you've got an ongoing series that's going to end. I can kind of plan some of this stuff out and make it very organic. You know, he was lucky in that regard. And then you had the nostalgia of people that, like myself, who wanted to see the Green Lantern Corps return. But then you had the excitement of bringing the Corps and Hal Jordan back. And you had a clean slate, which nobody has had in a long time, and nobody's had since. You know, so you had the perfect lightning in a bottle scenario of a great writer with a great vision at the right time with the right opportunity. And that doesn't always happen. And I don't think that Morrison necessarily had it, because everything is being compared to that golden era. And certainly Jeff Thorne doesn't have it, because he's not the writer that Jeff Johns is. And I don't think that DC has the leadership. I think one of the biggest problems DC has right now is that they let go of so many people that you don't have. And I don't mean this to sound like I'm trying to insult the creators and the people who work at DC Comics, but you no longer have the cream of the crop. You've got who they can get. And unfortunately, that's not the same level of talent as you have that are leaving, that have left.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I never thought about it like that, but that's an excellent point. I do like Peter's use of the word slog. You know, I mean, he's not wrong, right? I mean, we're slogging. We're 6 issues in, and we've slogged through all these, you know, and unfortunately, we at least got 6 more to slog through. So at least you know what we're in for.
True.
All right. Well, I guess that Power Wing's going to play the next message, huh?
Our last message is from Depressed Green Lantern fan, who has comments about the current series. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
What was DC thinking in hiring a guy who hated Green Lantern's legacy and would go back and forth arguing with Green Lantern fans on social media to head the Green Lantern series? The only thing I can take from that is that DC hates their fans, so they intentionally chose a guy who hates this particular franchise's fans to push the customer away. Maybe it's all part of the plan, since Atant doesn't even want the comics division anymore, just the movie and TV rights to the characters, so they're intentionally sabotaging it. And if the idea was they just wanted a black writer to write a black character, then you can't look me in the eye and tell me there weren't other aspiring black witters who actually love the franchise and all the characters and the fan base to write the series instead. They'll be checking in to see when this guy gets booted, then I may give the series another shot. In the meantime, I'm saving my money. Also, the art sucks, but that's an issue plaguing almost all comics these days.
All right. Well, this one is from the depressed Green Lantern fan. So to mirror what this person is feeling, him or her, doesn't matter. I think we're all in the same boat with what's going on. So let's dive into this. Hiring a guy who doesn't like Green Lantern's legacy. Myron would be better served to chime in on this when he talks about it. But you're right. I mean, if I have a catalog of books, I say, here's Superman. I'm not going to give my Superman book to somebody who rails on the character. I mean, that would be a disservice to, number one, the writer, but more importantly, the character itself. You always want to go with your strong person. Okay, so Batman sells. Let's say this: at this point in DC Comics, you could put a kindergartner writing a Batman book, and they'd still probably publish it. So that's not a good comparison to go by. But if you have a strong character and you have a strong title, you want to give it to a strong writer. I mean, that's why they spent so much money getting Bendis on board, to do whatever he did, which to me didn't amount to much. But that's the point you want to go with when you're a big publisher. And I don't mirror how Myron took the whole Thorn stuff with the social media aspect, but I understand it because it does leave a bad taste in consumers' mouth. DC hates their fans. I will go so far to say DC doesn't know their fans. I mean, they may not hate us, but they don't know us because they don't take the time. Personally, I feel like they don't take the time to develop in ways that fans want to see things develop. Now, case in point, this is going to go back to that whole round tournament they just had a few months back. Remember that, Myron?
Oh yeah, the whole little thing where they were voting for what book's going to get a shot, kind of thing.
They don't know their fans. By producing a tournament like that doesn't tell me they know their fans. By producing a tournament like that tells me they don't know themselves. Fans know what they like, and if you don't go on social media, or if you don't navigate the channels of your fandom, that's a problem. They should know what fans want and like at this point, but I don't think they know what they want to do at this point. And I think that DC has that issue right now, and I think that's why they're slogging through whatever they're slogging through. I've dropped all my titles since this whole thing started. I don't read Wonder Woman anymore. There's no Aquaman to read anymore, so I don't read that. I don't read Justice League anymore. The only title I read from DC right now are basically two books, and that's Green Lantern, and that's Superman and the Authority. And that's only because it's written by Grant Morrison, because I like Grant Morrison. Other than that, I've dropped all my titles. I've been a Superman fan for decades now. I don't even read his book anymore. It's only because they've shifted what they wanted to do. And a lot of it is in ways that I just, as a fan, I'm not into, and maybe that's just my beef that I have to carry. And I don't know if it's mirrored with a lot of fans out there, but I can tell you right now, I don't feel like DC is at its strongest point when they've written before. I think that time has come and gone, and I think they're going to be hard pressed to try to get it back. In reference to your AT&T line, the AT&T stuff, I can't delve too far into, but it's going to be the same thing. AT&T's in it for the money. They don't see fans. They see dollars. They want the money. They want the cash roll in. whatever they can give the fans that the fans will buy, they'll do it. And this goes back to what I said about DC not caring about their fans. AT&T doesn't either, as well as Time Warner. They'll pick and choose what they want to do and hopes that it's going to work. They don't have a fan base like Marvel does, because Marvel has tapped that fan base to perfection since they started their whole line back with the original Iron Man movie. And like it or not, they still developed a big universe over the course of time. And it took a lot of effort to develop. And it took a lot of people with vision to encapsulate that and give it to the fans. There were parts that were criticized, but not near as many things that are harsh as criticism as DC and Warner has endured over the years. Your thoughts, Myron?
Well, I don't know as if I would agree that Jeff Thorne hates Green Lantern's legacy. I think he just likes Jon Stewart to the extent of not liking anything else but Jon Stewart. I honestly feel, some of the comments that he's made, he believes that the Justice League Unlimited is the reason why Jon Stewart should be the face of the franchise, and I strongly disagree with him. I think that's what colors everything that he does. He's looking at it through that lens, and I think listening to him talk, if what he says is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt him, he's a huge comic book fan and he knows DC lore. I just think he wants Jon Stewart to be front and center so much that he says a lot of things that are kind of over the top, and I don't think he necessarily thinks well about it. I think he thinks he's smarter than he really is, and I don't mean that harshly, but he'll say things that are just spicy for the reaction. He keeps putting a graphic out there about no one is safe. Well, the only ones that are so far not safe are people that are characters that weren't getting any face time in the first place. If he wants to do something great, let's cull the human Green Lantern herd a little bit. Or do something a little bit more creative, because certainly this book is not lighting the world on fire. I think I agree with you, Phil. I don't think DC knows their fans. I think maybe at one time they might have, but again, that talent left, and I think you've got people in charge who are doing the same things that people thought Dan Didio was guilty of, and that's doing passion projects and things that they believe in, and not really listening to the audience or looking at it from a business perspective of what sells and how do we capitalize on that. I mean, if you think about, again, I hate to go back and talk about the Johns era, but there was a time in which Green Lantern sold 5 books a month and they were all doing really well. There was a time when the Green Lantern franchise outsold everything DC had out there except for Batman. So yeah, obviously, in terms of looking at this through a Green Lantern lens, there's an audience out there, but the product has to be there, and they keep cutting it back to they cut it down to 1 book, and that formula is not going to work. The reason why it's not selling, well, take a real good look at it. Go out there and look and see what fans are saying. I mean, I go out there and I check the CBR forums, I check the GreenLanternCorps.com forums, I check Reddit, and I'm hearing the same things that you and I are saying. I don't hear a lot of people. For maybe every one person who likes the book, I hear 10 people criticizing the book. And so, they got to be paying attention to that, I would hope. But I don't think the people in charge are bothering to look to see. I think they've got their heads in the sands, and we're going to do what we want to do, and full speed ahead, regardless of how well it's being received. Yeah. That's the unfortunate thing. So I hope it doesn't destroy the company. I really do. I hope AT&T doesn't sell it off or license out the IPs and dismantle DC and license the IPs out and let other people publish them. I would hate to see that happen, but they've got to get somebody at the helm of this ship. Jim Lee is there, but I don't see him leading the company. Who's the voice of DC? For all of Dan Didio's faults, the one thing I thought he excelled at was being the face of the company and going out there and being a cheerleader for it. And, you saw Dan Didio talking about what's coming up in DC Comics. You don't see any of that stuff. He would do panels at conventions where he would just talk about the history of comics and share his love and passion and talk to fans about what they liked about comics and so on. They were listening to the customers. Maybe they didn't always do what everybody wanted. People complained about how he treated Wally and Roy Harper and those kind of things. But at the same time, he did give us the Jeff Johns era, so I just think that's, to me, is one of the problems with DC right now, is that there doesn't seem to be the leadership or the direction that there should be. You don't hear anything from the editors or the editor in chief or the publisher. I mean, you see Ghibli promoting Fandome, but that's about it. Where's the cheerleading for the company? And I think that's what's sorely missing. There seems to be just a lack of engagement, and we're just publishing product, and you're publishing so many Batman products because that sells, but you're not treating the rest of your merchandise, the rest of your IPs with enough care to get them to grow, and making some pretty bad decisions. So, I hate to be doom and gloom about it. I want to see things be better, but I don't know how it's going to happen until they wake up and see what fans are really interested in. It's interesting because, you'll see a lot of polls in social media and on some of these different forums, and they'll say, who's your favorite Green Lantern? And 9 times out of 10, Hal wins by a large margin, and then it's either Kyle or Jessica is number 2. And then the other one ends up being number 3, and John is in there somewhere near the top, but he's not the face of it, even though you've got people out there that'll say, well, he was my Green Lantern from the Justice League cartoon. Are they buying products, or are they just on social media as a presence? If they're not buying the books, what do you care what they have to say?
Yep, exactly.
But anyway, Power Ring, why don't you tell everybody how they can be a part of the show, and then we'll come back and wrap things up.
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of OA.
The podcast of
All right, Myron. Well, episode 199. That's a pretty big mark episode coming to an end. I kind of wish it was episode 199 on a positive book, but that's okay. We'll take it for what it is, right?
That's right. There's lots of things out there to like. I think at some point, what I think would be fun, Phil, maybe we'll do this in episode 201, is maybe we'll talk about what are we reading? If we're not reading the Green Lantern book with any level of enthusiasm, what are we reading that we're enjoying? And and share that with our listeners. That might be of interest.
We can do that.
I think that might be fun.
Retro reviews,
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what's out there. Maybe we can talk about what some of our favorite creators from Green Lantern past are doing right now, and what are they writing and publishing and creating. That might be fun too. So maybe we'll focus on some of that kind of stuff. But thanks everybody for hanging with us. And hopefully there wasn't too much of a slog for you. We'll be back in a couple weeks, and we'll have our good friend Bill Giancolli back, and we'll be talking about the last 10 years and maybe where we're going. So I hope you take time out of your day to send us your thoughts, and maybe share with us maybe some of your favorite moments, or maybe a favorite interview we've had, because we've had quite a few from the past. And we hope you'll join us for episode number 200 as we celebrate 10 years of the podcast of OA. Until next time, please keep your ring charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day. Take care, guys.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.